I started.
Okay, perfect. So that's recording.
Hi, everyone. We'll just wait a couple more minutes to see if we have a few more people attending, and then we'll start. So good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the webinar on office ergonomics, working from home. In this webinar, you'll learn some tips on how to set up your home office workstation to help you be more comfortable and productive while working from home. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please post them on the chat and I will check the chat messages sporadically. My name is Farzana Ismail and I'll be your presenter today. I am a Canadian Certified Professional Ergonomist and the in-house ergonomist with Athletes Care. I've been consulting in ergonomics for over 20 years. At least 80% of my work is in office environments. I usually do office assessments for both work offices and home offices. So I've seen every possible office environment scenario. And also due to COVID, we're all now experts at doing virtual assessments using photos and video conferencing. So the main topics we will cover today are how to improve your posture regardless if you have a proper workstation or whether you are using a dining table, laptop, or if you wear progressive lenses. If you are in the market for a new chair, what are some features you should look for? A growing trend in home offices is the use of sit-stand desks, and we'll look at some examples of sit-stand workstations. And then also we'll talk a little bit about are all products that are considered ergonomic good for you? And finally, we'll look at some ways of alternating your posture at home. So before we get into the meat of our topic today, let's first briefly talk about what ergonomics is. Ergonomics is about fitting the job to the worker, not forcing the worker to fit to the job. And this also applies to office ergonomics. So there are three approaches we use for introducing office ergonomics in the workplace. The first is by providing the right equipment and tools for the person to do their job. The second approach is proper use of the tools and equipment that you have been given. You may have the most ergonomically friendly workstation or chair, but if you don't use it the way it was intended, you aren't really going to benefit from having the ergonomic equipment. And then the third approach is movement and stretching. No one posture is good for 8 hours a day. So this is where movement and stretching comes in. And when we think about ergonomics, we often associate it with the workplace and fitting the work environment to the worker, but it can also apply to the home environment. And with a lot more people working from home or working the hybrid model, this is really important. So we're now going to go through several principles for setting up a computer workstation. So the first principle is working height. We have three main heights that we are concerned with, and these are the chair height, the keyboard mouse height, and the monitor height. And so we're going to we're going to go through each one of these in more detail. A mismatch between working heights and employees may lead to poor posture, discomfort, and inefficient work. So optimal working height can be a bit more challenging to achieve when working from home. So the principle for optimal working height is 90, 90, 90. So a 90-degree angle at the hips, 90 degrees at the knees, and 90 degrees at the elbows. So how do we achieve that 90 degrees at the elbows? By ensuring that the keyboard and mouse work surface are at elbow height. This then allows for neutral postures while typing and mousing. That is, the shoulders are completely relaxed, the elbows are at 90 degrees, and the wrists are straight. When the keyboard and mouse surface are too high or too low, this can result in awkward postures or non-neutral position. So why are these postures problematic? The short answer is that you are not as strong in those postures. Muscle strength is compromised when you're not in a neutral posture. We want people to be in neutral position as this reduces stress on the muscles, tendons, and bones, thus helping prevent musculoskeletal injury. So let's now look at which body parts are out of neutral position when the keyboard and mouse work surface are too high or too low. So when the work surface is too high, such as the photo on the left, the shoulders will be either shrugged or upwards reaching, the elbows will be straightened or extended, and the wrists will be bent backwards. And then when the work surface is too low, the elbows will be straightened, and again, the wrists will be bent backwards. So keep in mind that we aren't in these positions for just a few minutes of the day. We could be in these positions for a few hours of the day. So that's putting a lot of strain on the body. So desk heights in the office, they range from 27 to 29 inches. At home, we might be working at a surface that's even higher than 29 inches, such as the dining table. And if we are working at a surface that's too high, where the keyboard and mouse are above that elbow height, we may be raising our shoulders while typing and mousing. So there's two approaches to fix this so that the elbows are level with the keyboard and mouse. So the first option is to raise our seat height, and the second option is to lower the work surface. So we'll now go through both these options. So with the first option, you want to raise your seat height until your elbows are level with the keyboard and mouse on the work surface. So don't worry about your feet at this point. That's an easy fix. If your chair is fixed and not height adjustable, I would check if there's a higher chair at home. Sometimes the dining table chairs have a higher seat height. Another option for raising the seat height is to place seat cushions on your chair. Once you've raised your seat height, you may notice that your feet are not properly supported on the floor and or your thighs are sloping downward. So remember the 90, 90, 90 rule at the hips and the knees. So what you want to do here is to position a footrest at your feet so that your feet are properly supported and your thighs are parallel to the floor, and then you can achieve that 90-degree angle at the knees and the hips. If you do not have a footrest at home, you can use a stack of photocopy paper or sturdy box. These days, with so many Amazon deliveries, I'm sure we have lots of boxes floating around at home. Or you can even use a baking pan flipped over. So just make sure your knees and your hips are at the same level. So try not to use something that's too high. So whenever we're doing ergonomic assessments and we go into the offices, we frown upon people using the recycling bin upside down as a footrest because that's too high, and then you lose that 90 degrees at the hips. We can also use footrests or makeshift footrests to change our position periodically throughout the day. So you might have a footrest directly underneath your knee joints for a period of time, and then you might push it towards the back of the desk, and then just stretch out your feet. So if you don't have an office desk at home, you want to find a table that's ideally between 26 and 29 inches high. So generally, the lower the desk we can find, the better. So here we're talking about lowering the work surface height. Sometimes we have to be a bit creative when we are working from home. So most ironing boards are height adjustable. So you could try to do the setup here in the photo on the left. So lower the ironing board to your elbow height and then position an external keyboard and mouse on the ironing board, and then position the monitor or laptop screen on a higher surface behind, raised up to your eye level. And if you are using your dining table and not looking to buy a new desk, maybe because you just don't have the space for it at home, you could install something like a clamp-on keyboard tray, such as this one shown on the slide, which would require no drilling and could be removed in the evening or weekends, thus maintaining the aesthetics of your home. So speaking about work surfaces, I do want to briefly talk about sit-stand desks and point out some things for you to consider when selecting a sit-stand desk. The first option we're going to look at is the height adjustable electric desks, which are becoming increasingly popular. So let's look at a couple of popular options in the market today. So I've included Costco and IKEA because those are usually the go-to places to get desks. So the Costco electric desk has a height range of 27.6 to 46.5 inches. So at the lowest desk height, if you lowered it all the way to the bottom, it is actually too high for the average height and shorter users for seated work. And it actually does not go high enough for the tall males when they're standing. So just last week, I did an assessment for an employee at her home office. Like many other employees, she's also working the hybrid model, so working 2 days per week at her home office. So she recently purchased this particular desk from Costco for her home to share with her tall husband. She said the desk works great for her husband, but was too high for her as she's only 5'4". She tried raising her chair as high as possible so that her elbows would be level with the desk surface, but the chair did not go high enough. So what did she end up having to do? She ended up having to buy a new chair that went higher and also had to buy a footrest to support the feet. So the reason I'm pointing this out is that sometimes people tend to go for the cheapest model that's out there, and it might not be suitable for them. And so that's why I just wanted to share this example. So the IKEA electric desk has a height range of 22 to 48 inches. So compared to the Costco model, the IKEA desk has a better height range and does go much lower and higher. So this desk would accommodate users of all sizes. So when it comes to electric desks, the IKEA model may be a better option. So just keep in mind, there's a lot of sit-stand desks at IKEA, and some of them do not have this height range. So you want to be careful also when you go to a particular store. Look at the variety of sit-stand desks available before you pick one. So now if we only knew which company, IKEA or Costco, had the better soft serve ice cream, but I think that's a webinar for another day. So why did I do this exercise? Because I wanted to illustrate that not all electric desks are the same, and you need to watch out for things such as the height range. So what are the pros with sit-stand electric desks? The electric sit-stand desk is quick and effortless when transitioning between sitting and standing. If it only takes about 10 seconds to alternate position, then it is likely that the employee will alternate between sitting and standing more frequently, ideally at least once per hour. And then depending on which style of electric sit-stand desk you go with, they can come in different sizes and colors. And this is particularly important if you are trying to maintain the aesthetics of your home. Most electric sit-stand desks are rectangular, but you can also get them with L shapes or curved work surfaces for those that need larger desks because of the work that they do. Now, another pro for the electric desks is that in most cases, you can use an existing desk surface and purchase the leg frame only. So this not only keeps the cost down, but allows you to maintain the aesthetics of the work area. So IKEA, for example, I know that they sell the leg frame only. So if you have a fixed height IKEA desk, you may be able to mount it onto the height adjustable leg frame. So what are some of the cons for electric sit-stand desks? So of all the sit-stand options, these usually tend to be the most expensive option, especially if you go with a model that has a good height range. And so what are some things to consider when purchasing an electric sit-stand desk? Consider height range, especially if you are of a shorter or taller stature. Consider a desk depth of about 30 inches if you're using dual monitors, and use an existing desk surface to maintain aesthetics and to reduce the cost. Let's now look at crank adjustable desks. So how many rotations do you think it takes to transition from sitting to standing and vice versa? So in watching the video, we find out that it's actually 90 rotations to transition from seated to standing height. And this is pretty consistent with other crank adjustable desks I've come across when I'm doing ergonomic assessments. So let's look at this typical crank adjustment sit stand desk from IKEA. So it has a height range of 28.5 inches to 48 inches. So it accommodates the seated and standing elbow heights for taller users. However, at the lowest desk height, it is too high for 2/3 of the population. That is for the shorter users as well as for average height users. So the crank adjustment model does not accommodate as many users as its electric counterpart from IKEA, and you may see similar findings with other crank adjustment desks from other suppliers. Let's now look at the pros and cons for crank adjustable desks. These tend to be cheaper than the electric sit-stand desk. So just to give you a comparison, the IKEA electric sit-stand desk with the good height range is about $5.99, whereas the IKEA's crank adjustment desk is $2.99, so almost half the price. There are also no power requirements, so there is some flexibility with placement of the desks. Now let's look at the cons. As we saw in the video, it takes at least 90 rotations to raise or lower the desk to the desired height. And then because these desks take so many shoulder turns and few minutes to transition from seated to standing height, employees may not alternate between seated and standing throughout the day, and instead may adopt standing or sitting for long periods when using this desk. So they're not really benefiting from having a sit-stand workstation. Also, because of the rotations, which primarily originate from the shoulder and elbow, I personally would not recommend this for someone with shoulder or elbow issues. Also, as we saw with the IKEA crank adjustable desk, these desks do not have the same height range as electric desks and do not go low or high enough for a significant portion of the population. When it comes to purchasing this type of desk, I wouldn't recommend it if you're looking for a desk that allows you to change positions frequently throughout the day. Now let's talk about sit-stand converters for use on existing desks. Let's start with the tabletop version, as this is the most common style. So the first one we're going to look at is the Very. It has two tiers, the top tier for the monitors and the bottom tier for the keyboard and mouse. So at the lowest height, the keyboard or mouse platform sits at about half to an inch above the work surface. Given that most desks are about 29 inches high, and assuming that the sit-stand converter is sitting on top of a 29-inch high desk, it would have a height range of approximately 29.5 to 42 inches. At the lowest height, it is too high for all users except for taller males. Even if you look at the advertised photo on the slide on the left, you can see the employee on the left would have to raise her shoulders to use the keyboard and mouse at the lowest height. And at the maximum height, it also does not go high enough for taller populations. Now let's look at the Ergotron tabletop sit-stand converter. The big difference between this converter and the Very converter is that the keyboard and mouse platform is a drop-down keyboard mouse tray, so it sits below the desk as compared to the Very, where the keyboard mouse surface sits on top of the desk. The other difference is that with this unit, the keyboard and mouse platform actually goes 16 inches above the desk, so it can be raised to a height of 45 inches. And then assuming this converter is sitting on top of a 29-inch high desk, it would have a height range of 25 to 45 inches. So for seated work, it accommodates all users, and for standing work, it accommodates almost all populations except a really tall male. So when compared to Very, it looks like the Ergotron is a good option because it accommodates more populations. So I see we have a question. So I'm just going to open the question box. Thanks. And will the slides be available? So the slides wouldn't be available, but the recording will be available. So Athletes Care will send out a the recording after the presentation today. So now let's look at the pros and cons of the tabletop sit-stand converters. So for the most part, the desk converters are the least expensive option, but again, it depends on which style and size you go with. One of the biggest pluses to the converters is the fact that users can keep their existing desk. The top tier holds the monitors, but it can also be used for writing or referring to paperwork. Now let's look at the cons. So due to limited space, the user may not be able to fit everything they need on the converter. If they frequently refer to large client files, use the phone or laptop for video conference meetings in addition to two LCD monitors, they may not be sufficient space to position all these items on the converter. These units require the user to reach sideways with the shoulders, grab and squeeze a pedal on each side, and then exert some force to lift and lower it. So again, it might not be a good choice for someone with existing shoulder issues. While this isn't true for all tabletop converters, as we saw with the two examples, many of the models available do not go low enough for shorter or average size users. If the keyboard and mouse work surface sits on top of an existing desk, the keyboard and mouse will be too high, resulting in awkward shoulder and elbow postures while typing and mousing, and eventually lead to discomfort. So what are some things to consider when purchasing a tabletop sit-stand converter? Choose the correct tabletop based on your stature. Also make sure to check the depth of the existing desk, as most require a minimum desk depth of 23.5 to 26 inches, depending on which style you end up going with. So now let's look at another less common option for a sit-stand converter. And this is a pedestal version where the converter clamps onto the front edge of the desk. To transition between seated and standing work, you simply grab the handle you see to the left of the coffee mug in the photo and slide the unit along a track. Now let's see which populations it accommodates. So again, assuming a 29-inch high desk, the height range for a keyboard mouse work surface on the pedestal version is 25 to 43 inches. As you can see in the photo, for seated work, the keyboard mouse tray goes below the desk. Therefore, it's no surprise that it accommodates all populations when it comes to seated work. For standing work, however, it accommodates approximately half the population, with it being too low for the taller population as well as the average height male population. Let's now look at the pros and cons of the pedestal sit-stand converter. So when it comes to pros, the sit-stand unit clamps onto the front edge of the existing desk, which means it can be installed onto narrow desks as well. This unit does not require excessive effort to go between seated and standing height, so it's a good option for those with shoulder issues. This unit also comes with an optional work surface, which sits above the keyboard and mouse platform, so for placement of paperwork or even your morning cup of coffee. The pedestal version is available for dual LCD monitors, single LCD monitors, and even LCD laptop combo. Looking at the cons, if we look at the price of this unit, which sells for about $1,300 at Staples, there isn't much difference between the price of this and an electric desk. This unit does come with an optional tall kit, but keep in mind it will only raise the monitors and will not raise the keyboard mouse platform. So I don't usually recommend this type of a sit-stand converter for tall employees. So I hope the short review of the 4 different types of sit-stand desks has illustrated that there is some research that needs to go into purchasing the correct sit-stand desk. So if you're looking to buy one and want to make sure you get the correct one for yourself, we can help by doing an in-person or virtual ergonomics assessment and providing you with the best options given your stature. Now, if you do decide to stand for parts of your day, here are some options that you have if you don't have a sit-stand desk at home. So you can use the kitchen counter, a tall cabinet, or even again, the ironing board. If the work surface is too low, as is the case with the man using the ironing board in the photo, you can also prop the laptop on top of books or boxes, which is what the individual on the right has done. And with all the, again, with all the online shopping that everyone's doing, I'm sure it shouldn't be too hard to find a box. The goal is that we want to make sure that the keyboard and the mouse height are level with the elbows, which is what we see in the photo on the right. And here are just some guidelines if you do decide to incorporate standing while you're working from home. The principles are the same for sitting and standing. So we want the keyboard and mouse at elbow height. When we are standing, we want to make sure that we're wearing supportive footwear. Probably not as much of a concern at home as in the office. We're probably not wearing heels at home, but just make sure you've got supportive footwear on if you're going to be standing. We want to change our positions often, so the guidelines recommend that we sit no more than 30 to 60 minutes at a time and stand no more than 15 to 20 minutes at a time. So basically changing our posture every hour. And just like if you were starting a new routine at the gym, you wouldn't go lift 100 pounds right off the bat. So we sort of have to build up our tolerance to standing. We might start with standing just 10 to 15 minutes at a time, maybe 3 times a day, and then gradually increase this. The next principle is the chair. So let's look at how the chair should be set up. So when it comes to seat height, as previously mentioned, if you are working at a high work surface, you want to adjust the seat height such that the elbows are level with the keyboard and mouse on the desk. If after raising the seat height, the thighs slope downward and or your feet are unsupported, then you would use a footrest. This will allow you to achieve the 90 degrees at the hips, knees, and elbows. And if you are working at a height adjustable or a lower height work surface, such as a keyboard tray, adjustable desk, or even the ironing board, then you adjust the seat height such that the feet are planted on the floor and the thighs are parallel to the floor. And then when it comes to seat depth, you want to make sure the distance between the back of your knees and the front of the seat pan is the size of a fist or approximately 2 to 3 fingers. You want to make sure that the lumbar curve on the chair's backrest fits the small of your back. And if you have an adjustable back angle, which most office chairs do, adjust the backrest to allow for a 90 to 110 degree angle between the upper body and the thighs. So 90 degrees would be sitting completely upright, and 110 degrees is a bit of a recline. This is also a bit of a personal preference, but the idea with this one is that we should be able to sink back comfortably into the chair and still easily reach the keyboard and mouse. And when it comes to armrests, these should be level with the elbows. So the rule of thumb is elbow height equals armrest height equals work surface height. Armrests that are too high will cause your shoulders to be raised while using the keyboard and mouse. So keep in mind that regardless of the chair that we have available to us, the goal is to support the body. If you are looking to purchase a chair for your home office, here are some key features that you want to look for. At a minimum, you want to ensure that the chair has a seat pan that is height adjustable, has good lumbar support that is also adjustable so that you can fit it into your lumbar curve, and ideally a waterfall seat pan edge, which just means that the seat slopes downward at the front end, so there's no contact pressure under your thighs. In the CSA office ergonomic standards, recline and tilt features are important because they do recommend having a chair that allows you to move through multiple postures throughout the day. If you're somewhat restricted in your budget, ensure that the seat pan size you select allows the majority of your thighs to be supported and there is that 2 to 3 finger gap behind your knees. As long as the seat pan length fits you, then seat pan depth adjustability is not required. Armrests and inflatable lumbar support are nice to have, but are not really required. And with regards to headrests, we typically only recommend them if someone has had a pre-existing neck injury. Again, if you need help determining the right chair for you, please reach out to us to do an ergonomics assessment. A good ergonomic chair can cost almost $1,000 or more. So you want to make sure you are getting the right one for you. Now, if we don't have an office chair and you're not looking to buy a new one, we want to try and pick the best chair we can find in the house. At the very least, your chair should have a backrest. And then if the chair is not height adjustable, as mentioned before, you can use a seat cushion to raise yourself up so that your elbows are level with the keyboard and mouse on the desk. And then just make sure you're using a footrest or a makeshift footrest so that your feet are still properly supported. Patio chair cushions are great to use as they are quite sturdy compared to the ones we may find on our sofa or the bed. And if the chair has limited or no lumbar support, you can roll up a towel or sweater to position in the small of your back, just like in the photo. The next principle is the keyboard. So I already mentioned that we want the keyboard positioned at elbow height. And if your keyboard is at the recommended elbow height, you'll have that 90 degrees at the elbows and your forearms are going to be horizontal to the floor. If the keyboard's too low, the elbows and wrists will be in an awkward position. And again, if the keyboard's too high, then your shoulders will be raised while typing. If you are using a laptop, the CSA standards recommend that you use an external keyboard to ensure that you are able to get both the proper monitor height as well as the proper keyboard height. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. If you don't have an external keyboard available, but you are using an external monitor, what you can do is fold your laptop open all the way and then use your laptop keypad. And here are just some other tips for positioning your keyboard. So because of the asymmetrical design of your keyboard, if you've got the number pad on the right side, you want to, and you center the entire keyboard with your body, you'll end up reaching across the body to use the alphabet portion. So what we do recommend is shifting the keyboard over so that the middle of the space bar is lined up with your belly button. If you are looking to purchase a keyboard, now is a good time to consider some other options. So with a standard keyboard, especially if you have more of a petite frame, you'll end up having quite a reach past the number pad to get to the mouse. So if you don't really use the number pad, you can consider a keyboard without a number pad or a keyboard with a separate number pad that you can move to either side. There's now even some smaller keyboards with the built-in number pad for those employees that still use the number pad frequently. So if you look at the top photo is a keyboard with the number pad, and this keyboard is about 2 to 3 inches shorter in width compared to the standard keyboard. So a good option for those with right shoulder issues who use the number pad and want to minimize the reach to the mouse. And then there's even natural keyboards such as the one in the middle, which may be a good option for those with forearm or shoulder issues. The next principle is the mouse. I'm just going to quickly check if we have any questions or no questions. Keep in mind that each time you click your mouse, your index finger is performing a muscle contraction. It's estimated that the average office worker clicks their mouse 5,000 times a day. So mousing is a very repetitive task. And if you do a lot of scroll wheeling, again, that's a lot of work on the index finger. If your mouse is too small, you might be over gripping, and all of these things can lead to fatigue as the day goes on. So the CSA standards say the same thing for the mouse as they do for the keyboard. If you're going to be using a laptop, it is recommended that you use an external mouse. Using the laptop trackpad for prolonged periods can result in a static clawed posture, which we want to try and avoid. So a couple of tips for operating the mouse. So we want to position the mouse at the same height as the keyboard at elbow height and as close to the keyboard as possible. We want to try and keep a comfortable, relaxed grip on the mouse. So try shifting your hand slightly up on the mouse so the palm of your hand is resting on the back of the mouse as opposed to on the desk. And we want to try and avoid having any contact under the wrist. And imagine that your wrist is somewhat fixed. So what we want to try and avoid that side to side movement that keeps and keep the wrist straight while we are mousing. So we want to pivot about the elbow versus pivoting about the wrist. So you may have heard that ergonomists tend to recommend mousing with the left hand. So what are the benefits of left-handed mousing? So some of the benefits of left-handed mousing are that it allows us to share tasks more evenly between the right and the left sides. especially if you're right-handed and you find you do everything with your right hand, then your right side never really gets a break. So the other benefit for mousing with the left hand is the reduced reach to the mouse. So when mousing with the right hand, the number pad is in the way, resulting in a slightly far reach to the mouse. You don't have that problem when you mouse with the left hand. And if you are going to make the switch to left-handed mousing, a few things are required. So you'll have to make sure that you have a symmetrical shaped mouse and not one that is curved for the right hand. You'll have to reprogram the mouse for left-handed use. So this can be done through the mouse settings on your computer, where you would select right for the primary mouse button. And the last thing you'll need is patience. It does take 2 to 3 weeks to learn a new habit. You will work slower at first. You may experience a bit of discomfort on the left side because you're not used to that fine control, but that should go away. And if you are looking to purchase a new mouse, just ensure that you are selecting a standard size mouse to ensure that it properly fits your hand. If you do have bigger hands, then I would recommend a larger mouse. So you want to avoid compact and travel size mice. Those can lead to overgripping, and it just means our hand has to work harder to operate the mouse. Some other options you have are left-handed mice. A roller mouse sits in front of your keyboard and it has a scroll bar across the top, and you have to use both hands to operate it. Vertical mice just puts your hand into a more neutral handshake position. If you find that you have discomfort in turning your palm down, then this is an option to consider. Trackball mice are good for someone who has discomfort in gripping a mouse, as the trackball mouse completely eliminates that need to grip. We don't recommend thumb trackballs, as these result in thumb issues due to repetitive movements of the thumb. And then keep in mind that the further we move from a standard mouse, the greater the learning curve. So anytime we try new equipment, we might experience some initial discomfort. If that discomfort goes away, that's a good sign. If it doesn't, then maybe the equipment you're using isn't the right fit. So just be aware of those symptoms again. Now let's look at principle 5, which relates to monitor setup. So here's your ergonomic fun fact for the day. The human head weighs about 10 to 12 pounds, similar to the weight of a bowling ball. So anytime we move our head out of neutral position, whether it's bending forward, backward, or sideways, our neck muscles are balancing a 10 to 12 pound bowling ball on our head. So that's quite a bit of strain on the neck. This is why it's very important to position the monitor or laptop monitor correctly so as to avoid these awkward neck postures. So how do we want to position the monitor or laptop monitor? So the top of the screen should be at eye level. Our eyes naturally scan down, so anything that we position above our eye height, we may have to tilt our neck to see it. The monitor also needs to be directly in front of the body, and the middle of the screen should be lined up with the belly button and approximately arm's length away. So there's different ways to adjust the monitor. There's all kinds of monitor stands and monitor arms out there. And if you're working from home and not looking to purchase equipment, again, you can use the stack of photocopy paper, a box, books, and use as many as you need to raise the screen up to your eye level. Now, I just briefly want to talk about progressive lenses. So if you wear progressive lenses or bifocals, the guidelines for monitor height are a little bit different. So you'll have to ask yourself, do you view the screen from the top, middle, or bottom of the lens? If you view the screen through the bottom of the lens, your monitor needs to be lower than your eye height. And in terms of how much lower, basically to the point where you're able to view the top of your screen while your neck is in neutral position. That is, it is not bending backwards. So if you look at the photo, you can see this individual has the top of the screen at eye level, but because he's looking through the bottom of the lens, he is tilting his neck up in order, he's tilting his head up in order to see the screen. So sometimes it's a bit challenging to get the monitor to the right height with bifocal use or progressive lenses use. And if you're finding that's the case for you, there is the option of dedicated computer glasses. So this is something you can speak to your optometrist about. And then when it comes to dual monitors, the first step is to determine the usage of the monitors. Do you use them equally or do you use one more than the other? Approximately 70% of the time. If you do use one monitor more than the other, first position the primary monitor directly in front of the belly button and the middle of the space bar. And then the secondary monitor should go to the immediate right or left, depending on which eye is dominant. So just keep in mind, eye dominance is not the same as hand dominance. And we can send some information later about how to determine which eye is dominant. So the diagram on the left shows the setup for someone who has a primary and secondary monitor. The primary monitor is positioned directly in front of the belly button and the middle of the space bar. And then because this particular user is left eye dominant, the secondary monitor is positioned to the left of the primary monitor. The diagram on the right shows the setup if you use both monitors equally. In this case, you position the monitors such that the V shape from the monitors is lined up with the belly button and the middle of the space bar on the keyboard. So what are some issues with using a laptop? So if we use the laptop as is, the keyboard is too high, the monitor is too low, and that's because we can't separate the keyboard and the monitor. If your laptop keypad is at the recommended elbow height, the monitor will be too low. And if the laptop monitor is raised so that the top of the screen is at eye level, then the keypad is too high. If it's a smaller laptop, the keypad can be quite compact, and then we end up with our arms squished beside us trying to use the keys. And if the mouse pad is in the middle of the laptop, the wrist ends up cranked to the side while mousing. And if the laptop has a thick edge at the front, we can have contact pressure under the wrist. So there's a lot of issues when using a laptop, and that's why it's not recommended for long-term use as is. So what options do we have when using the laptop? We can either raise the laptop monitor so that the top of the screen is at eye level, and then use an external keyboard and an external mouse. We can use a laptop riser, such as the one in the photo, a sturdy box, books, or stacks of photocopy paper to raise the laptop monitor height. And if you have an external LCD monitor, we can fold the laptop flat and just use the laptop keypad and an external mouse. So this is just an image of the ideal workstation setup when using a laptop with an external keyboard and external mouse. You'll notice that the top of the laptop screen is at eye level, and the external keyboard and external mouse are at the recommended elbow height. And when talking about the chair, we recommended that the armrests are level with the elbows, and you can see that in the photo as well. So we talked about working heights. Working reaches are important as well. So the area within your forearm's reach is considered prime real estate. Basically, you're going to ask yourself this question: what do I use most often? So typically when I'm on the computer, that's going to be the keyboard and mouse. So those are going to be within forearm's reach. Maybe there's periods of time when we're doing paperwork, so we might move the keyboard and mouse out of the way and bring our papers in. Or maybe we have a period in the day when we're doing a lot of telephone work, so we might bring our telephone in closer. But the idea is that we rearrange the workstation based on what we're using. You'll also notice in the photo on the top that when the keyboard is positioned too far beyond forearm's reach, we no longer have that neutral, relaxed shoulder postures, and our elbows are extended and wrists are bent backwards. By placing the keyboard close to the edge of the desk, we can adopt neutral postures with the shoulders relaxed and elbows at 90 degrees, as shown in the photo in the bottom. The last principle, and probably as important as the first, is movement. The human body needs movement to keep it comfortable and to keep it healthy. And because we probably don't have the same equipment at home as we do at the office, maybe it's not as adjustable. Movement is even more important when we are working from home. So these are some recommended guidelines for movement. So try to take breaks from the computer work every 1 to 2 hours. And that just means alternating your tasks. If you have telephone work or paperwork, try to split it up throughout the day so that you're not just doing computer work for 8 hours a day. At least once an hour, try to stand up and move around. You can also stand while taking phone calls. The 20-20 rule is for the eyes. So that just tells us to change our viewing distance every 20 minutes. So maybe look out the window. For those working from home, I'll tell them to take their laptop to the kitchen counter, for example, during meetings, webinars, or e-learning courses where they may not be actively having to use the computer. And finally, use work breaks to stretch, rest, or change posture. We've also now gotten into this mode where we're recommending having meetings where you're actually just walking outside. And if you don't have to, have your video on during the meetings, it's a good opportunity to change your position as well. So this is just a stretching part, which we're going to share with you after the presentation, but it has some stretches that we would recommend for office workers. And my contact is also at the bottom of the stretching card. So you can certainly reach out to me if you have any questions or require an ergonomic assessment done. So before ending the webinar, I just want to provide some general guidelines for purchasing equipment. First thing you should ask yourself is this a good tool or is it a gimmick? There's so much equipment out there and it's hard to know what is going to be a good fit and what might just be a marketing scheme. Unfortunately, there are no guidelines for calling a piece of equipment ergonomic. Oftentimes the price is high and it makes us believe that it must be good, but ask yourself, does this piece of equipment improve my posture? Can it be adjusted to fit me? Is it really required? Do I really need to have this $150 footrest? Or can I use a box instead that will work just as well? So I'd like to thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found this webinar informative and helpful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them, or you can post it on the chat. And I'll just put up the slide with my contact information. Okay, so thank you. Thanks for your feedback, Salima. Someone asked, will there be a recording of this available? Yes, there will be a recording available. Any other questions? Okay, questions come in. Does a good office chair have a lifespan if you take care of it? So I have a really good ergonomic chair, and I've had it since 2009. So it's been 15 years, and I see getting at least another 5 years of use out of it. Um, some of the good companies that sell really good ergonomic chairs have excellent warranties on their equipment. So some of them come with 12 years warranty. And so that's something you want to look at as well when you're purchasing ergonomic equipment. And then another question we have is, does insurance cover assessments? Some providers do cover the assessments, so that's something you can certainly look into with your own insurance providers. Is there a touchpad keyboard preferable to a hardware keyboard? I would say my preference is to go for a hardware keyboard as opposed to a touchpad keyboard because there's no that tactile feedback. So sometimes what ends up happening is when you don't have that tactile feedback, you end up pressing the keys harder than you need to. And so my preference would be to go for a hardware keyboard versus a touchpad keyboard. Do we have any other questions? Will ergonomic assessment be done for both in office and at home? So I offer ergonomic assessments for both work offices and home offices. And then sometimes just to cut down costs, what we can do is I can do a assessment for the most problematic workstation. So if that happens to be your home office, we can do it there. And then you can show me photos and measurements of the work office, which I can tell you which ones I need, which photos and measurements I need. And then I can give you some suggestions for improving the workstation setup at the work office as well. And like I said before, we do offer in-person as well as virtual ergonomic assessments. Any other questions? Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions. So thank you all for joining the webinar and have yourself a great afternoon.